Good morning, Year 7. I'm very excited about your lessons this week because you're starting a new inquiry. And this inquiry, in fact, this whole cycle D, is all about a very important series of events which took place in Britain in the 17th century, in the 1600s. In fact, to be precise, between 1603 which was when the Tudor age ended, until really the Glorious Revolution, which is in 1688. So the first thing you're going to do is go to Microsoft Teams. So I've got mine open in the app here at the bottom, but you'd be on the internet. You're going to go to our History Year 17, and you'll notice there are two assignments that have gone up already. Now, you need to do this second one first, lessons 6 and 7, week 4, History Year 7. Do that one first. Don't try and do the quiz first, because the quiz is about those lessons. So unless you've done those lessons, you won't be able to do the quiz. You won't know the answers. It won't make any sense. But the quiz is important, and it's important I tell you about it now. You are going to sit that quiz, as I said, after the lessons, and it will send me all of your answers. Therefore, I know if you've done the lesson properly, if you're paying attention, because if you don't know the answers, clearly you've not done it. It will be very, very obvious to me. It is also clear that who hasn't even tried the assignment, because it sends me all of your results immediately after you've done it. So those of you who the last few weeks haven't been doing your history work, and there are probably quite a few of you, about 40% of the year group, you need to pull your socks up a bit, and you need to do the assignment and the quiz. So, like I said, we're going to start with lessons 6 and 7. We'll click on View Assignment. You could click Assignments at the top as well. Clicking on that actually just takes you to that page. If I go onto Student View, it will look as it does for you. It's thinking about it. There we go. And you'll notice here's all the information about doing the quiz. Now, you'll also notice that I've added here a knowledge organizer for you. I'd suggest that you do open this. So if you click on it, it will open it and you can see it there. And I'd probably then go ahead and, I'm just going to go ahead and close this so I can go on to the assignment. But I would keep that open whilst you're working if you can. Okay, I think, can we do it by, if I click on Open in Word Online, I think it should, yeah, there we go. If I click on Open in Word Online, it's going to open another document for me in a web browser. And that way I can have the knowledge organizer open in front of me whilst I'm doing the work. It's done some funny things, as Word always does to it. There we go, it's sorted itself out now. So keep that open in front of you whilst you're working, because you'll need it. There's lots of keywords in this lesson, okay? So go back onto Teams. I'm going to go into the assignment proper now. Click on History, Year 7, Week 4, Lesson 6 and 7, Doc X. Once it's loaded, lots of you are still unsure about this step. If you're doing this at home and you're going to print it out and do it on paper, that's fine. Click Print and then follow the instructions in the video that I posted in the lesson instructions for this week, explaining how to take photos of that and upload it. But most of you are just going to go ahead and click Edit in Document. It'll give you two options. Edit in Desktop App means if you've got Word at home, you're doing it on your own computer. Again, follow the instructions in my YouTube video about how to hand that in once you're finished. But most of you, I'd suggest you click Edit in Browser, because although it moves things around, it's actually much, much easier to hand it in if you do it this way. So the first job, and you'll notice the first lesson is about something called the English Civil War. More about that later, but if you're not sure, there's a definition for it there. The first job is to put those time periods in order. And if you finish that, you can add Stuart Britain 2 as the challenge. And then second job, add these events in order along the timeline. And again, there's a challenge underneath with more events to add afterwards. I'm going to go ahead and just pause the video here, and then we'll go through the answers shortly. But it should take you at least sort of 3 or 4 minutes to do that task, okay? Okay, so let's go through that together. So out of those time periods, the earliest one you should have is Iron Age Britain, which actually goes off our timeline, but we'll put it on there from 500 BC until about 40 AD. Now, the second you should have is Roman Britain from 40 AD to 440 AD. It's a little bit complicated here, and we simplify it by separating them out. But technically speaking, Roman Britain is still the Iron Age. We just say from Iron Age from 500 to 40 AD because it makes it simpler for you to understand that way. After the Romans, you should have the Anglo-Saxons or the Dark Ages. And the Anglo-Saxons, in combination with the Vikings, of course, ruled Britain from roughly 440 AD until 1066 AD. Next, you should have medieval England from 1066 until 1485, which is when the Battle of Bosworth took place. Henry VII defeated King Richard III, who was killed in the battle, and the start of the Tudor Age, which you studied in Cycle C. After the medieval period, you should, of course, then have the Tudors from 1485 until 1603, which is the year Queen Elizabeth I died. Okay, let's put those events in order then. The first event that you should have on there is the Battle of Hastings, which happens in 1066. Next, you should have the Black Death arriving in about 1348. 48. Next should be the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. Henry VIII's Protestant Reformation, well, I would put it in the 1530s, 1533 to 35, if we were being a bit more exact, but if you put it in 1530s, that would be best. And Mary I's reign, I'm going to go and double check the dates because I don't want to give you the wrong dates. Mary I ruled from 1553 until 1558. Okay? Next task then. We're going to be looking at a particular king, as I mentioned, in the 17th century. But before we do that, we're going to think about some kings and queens we do know. And we're starting with our monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. I just need you to think about these questions. You're not going to write anything down. How powerful, from 1 to 10, is our Queen Elizabeth II? And could you imagine the British people voting to get rid of Queen Elizabeth II? Pause the video here, think about that for 30 seconds, and come up with an answer. Okay, secondly then, what about Henry VIII? How powerful was Henry VIII from 1 to 10? Be interested to see if you think he was more or less powerful than Queen Elizabeth II, our Queen. And could you imagine his subjects, the people he ruled, voting to get rid of him? Again, pause the video here, think about those questions for 30 seconds, come up with an answer in your head. Okay, hopefully you've thought carefully about that. Now, I think if it were me, I'd be saying, Queen Elizabeth, how powerful is she? Well, she's probably not that powerful. She does have a lot of powers, theoretically. She can cancel laws and things the government bring in. She technically speaking, owns all of the soil underneath the ground. So she can turn up to your house and say, oh, your house, it belongs to me now, because she technically owns the soil, which is a weird rule that's remained. But of course, she never kind of enacts these powers. And if she did, there'd probably be riots. So I don't think she has that much power. I think I would say about 4. But can I imagine the British people voting to get rid of Queen Elizabeth II? Well, no. Certainly not in Britain. And I think when you think about longer term, or you think about other countries, in my lifetime, Australia had a vote as to whether they wanted the Queen to remain their Queen, and they voted yes. So I don't think people would vote to get rid of Queen Elizabeth II. Henry VIII, though, I think he was much more powerful. I think he's more like a 9 or maybe even a 10. Could I imagine his subjects voting to get rid of him? Absolutely not. But what's really interesting is that something far worse happened to one king in our history. The king I'm talking about is the king who's circled in the red circle in this picture below. Can you find this king somewhere else in this painting? Pause the video here, complete that task now. Okay, hopefully you found him. And you may have found him liberated, or with his head liberated from his shoulders. That's because this is this man here. His head is being held up by an executioner. Here's the man with the axe who's clearly just chopped his head off, and there is his body. Who might this man be? He is linked to the people we discussed earlier. Pause the video here, complete that task, or think about that now. This king is, of course, Charles I. Charles I was executed by having his head cut off in 1649. It's a very important and momentous event in British history. In fact, he's the only king to be executed in our history in such a manner. It's clearly quite a shocking event. I certainly can't imagine our queen being voted off as being the queen, let alone having her head cut off by her people as a crowd of them watch. Even more embarrassing, it was done in front of a building called Banqueting House, a building which had been built by this king's father, and this king had organised for a very famous painter called Rubens to create a huge, massive painting on the ceiling in one of the Banqueting House, commemorating his father's rule. His father was James I, gunpowder plot and all that. This man is Charles I. What I need you to do, please, is do some research online about this painting. You could type in beheaded king into Google. You could type in Charles I. Now you know about that. What's happening in this painting? When was it made? What caused this to happen? Do some research. Spend a couple of minutes and record your research on a notepad at home. Now, the reasons for this beheading of Charles I are very complicated. It has to do with a conflict which developed between Charles and Parliament across his reign as King of England. What that conflict, what those arguments sparked was the biggest civil war in British history, which still remains the most calamitous conflict, armed conflict, war in British history, i.e. it caused the biggest loss of life of British people from the British Isles. It's a very, very significant event in our history. Now, I said a couple of keywords there, but you may not understand yet. Parliament and civil war. What I need you to do is write a definition for those keywords. Pause the video here, do that now. Okay, if you're finding that a little bit tricky, if you go up and look at the key terms from this lesson, you will notice that actually those two words are included in this table. Parliament and civil war here. I would suggest that you don't just copy the keyword, write it in your own words because you're more likely to remember it, okay? If you haven't done that yet, pause the video, do that now. Now, the other reason the Civil War developed in the 17th century has to do with religious tension caused by a development of a group called Puritans. Looking at the pictures below, what can you infer about the word Puritan? These people, for example, we would describe as Puritans because of how they're dressed. This cross relates to the type of religion that Puritans were. Use your knowledge of the battle between Catholicism and Protestantism to work out what a Puritan might be. Pause the video here. Do that. Now. Okay, once you've had a think of that now about that question, now these people, Puritans, are from one Christian denomination. That means group of Christians. They are either Catholic or Protestant. So which do you think they are? What is your evidence for this from the pictures? And then when you finish that, you need to write your own definition of the word Puritan below. As above, this is actually one of the keywords for this lesson. So if you're struggling, look and find it and then write it in your own words. All of that should take you about 2 minutes. Pause the video here, do that now. Okay, now once you've done that, I've given you some information here about the Civil War, which you need to read. Now I'm going to read it to you because there's some tricky words here that I want to talk you through. But if you know that you are able to read this on your own without my help, pause the video or skip forward and don't listen to this part. The Civil War happened mostly because of a fight for power between Charles I and his supporters, known as Royalists, because they supported the king, the royals, and MPs, members of parliament, people who sat in parliament and made new laws. Parliament wanted to take powers from the king. Charles I was against this. However, the conflict was also caused by religion. Charles was a Protestant, but he was not a Puritan. Lots of MPs were. They thought Charles was too flashy and not pious, religious enough. Some even thought Charles I planned to turn Britain back into a Catholic country. These are the basic causes of the Civil War. But like all things in history, it's a bit more complicated. You'll find out more on the next page. Well, let's go and look at the next page then. Now, this task is quite tricky for you to do online. So what I suggest that you do is, if you can, go and print this out and do this on the printout, that's fine. Or you can number each of the boxes kind of in your head, as it were, and write down the numbers of the boxes on a notepad at home that you would put a box around or circle or star next to or whatever. But what you essentially need to do is read each of the yellow boxes, which give you some information about an event which led to the Civil War, which happened, and we're talking about a time period between really 1558 and 1642. There's a slight mistake there, really. Now, the first job is to circle at least, that means minimum, so there are more, 3 ways Charles caused conflict with Parliament. For example, I'm going to skip right here to 1625, when Charles becomes the king after James I dies, because this is about Charles. I know that the other earlier stuff might not help me. And if I look at the second one, it says Charles I marries Henrietta Maria, the sister of the King of France, a Catholic. Protestant MPs in Parliament were against the marriage. Well, that's something that I would circle because it caused conflict with Parliament. Then I'm going to look for number 2. I'm going to box at least 3 ways Parliament caused conflict with Charles I. So I'm going to look through this earlier stuff about Elizabeth and James. I don't think I'll find anything there, though. No, it's about the gunpowder plot and things like that. Can I find anywhere else where Parliament are causing conflict with Charles? I reckon this might be a good one. So it says here, in June 1628, Parliament, angry about the new taxes, presented Charles with a petition of right, which tried to take some of his powers away. Now, I'm inferring here that that's probably going to tick Charles off a bit. He's going to be a bit annoyed, but I am going to read on just to double check that. And it says, January 1629, Charles retaliated by closing Parliament. He ruled alone until 1640. This is called Charles's personal rule. Well, yeah, clearly that annoyed Charles. So that's a way that Parliament have caused conflict with Charles. So I put a box around it. It's then asked you to put a star next to the box where you think the Civil War became inevitable. What that means is when it had gone too far, there was no way the war could have been stopped. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's your personal judgment. I think, personally, the writing is on the wall from when Charles instigates something called the ship tax. If we look at what a lot of historians say, that they suggest that that was the big event really where Charles made a big mistake and really damaged his popularity. But I need you to read through all of these cards and decide for yourself. Do you agree with me that it's when the ship tax was collected in coastal towns that the war became inevitable? Do you think it was an earlier or a later event? You can disagree with this. That's what's great about history. Pause the video here, do all those tasks now. It should take you about 10 minutes. Now, you might have noticed here that on the next page there is a challenge task, the top of the page with a big C next to it. By all means, go ahead and do that too. But the last task in this lesson, you've got a choice. You're either going to do the Give Me 3 task, where you list 2 things you've learned today, 3 things you've learned today that caused the Civil War, or you're going to do the challenge task and write a claim paragraph explaining what caused the Civil War. Now, if you're doing the challenge task, you must use 3 of those words from the table. You know that when you're assessed on your sophisticated vocabulary. These are the types of words you should be regularly using in order to score sophisticated for your vocab on those assessments. So we're practicing it now. 2 choices then. 1, either do the Give Me 3 task, 3 causes of the Civil War. 2, write a paragraph explaining what caused the Civil War, a claim paragraph, claim, evidence, explain, therefore, and use 3 words from the table in your answer. Should take you at least 10 minutes, especially if you're doing the challenge task. Pause the video here, do that now, thanks. Okay, once you've done that, you can cycle on down to the next lesson. Now, you'll notice in between that I've just given you an overview of what we are going to learn in this cycle. So by all means, read that before you go any further. When you're ready, move on to the next lesson. Why were people so angry in 1642? So first thing I'm going to do is just get rid of these, because you're going to need to type there where it says type here. But you're going to start off by answering the questions in the Quizlet task, like always, and plotting all of those events in chronological order along those lines. Pause the video here, complete those tasks now. Okay, what started in 1642? You should know that as the Civil War. Write a definition of the key term Civil War. Well, if you don't know the answer, you're going to need to go back to lesson 1, look at the key terms from the start of the lesson and find out yourself. I'm not going to tell you on here, use your initiative. Secondly, putting those events in chronological order. Well, the earliest, like we said on the last lesson, is the Iron Age until about 40, not technically, but we'll stick with it for now, until about 40 AD. Anglo-Saxon England then would come next on that list, and that's from roughly 440 AD until 1066 AD. Medieval England from 1066 AD until 1485, the Battle of Bosworth. And finally, Tudor England from 1485 until 1603 AD. Okay, those events in order along that timeline. The first event that you should have on there is Charles I becoming king, which I believe is in 1625. After that, you should have Charles I's personal rule from 1628 until the 1630s, late 1630s. You should then have the prayer book being introduced in Scotland, which I believe was in 1635. And then finally, Charles I raising his flag in Nottingham in 1642. Next task then. We need to understand a new key term, and it's divine. What do you think the word divine might be? And your hint there is the cross of the Christian faith. Okay, if you didn't manage to work that out, the word divine means God, or often you say something has been divine intervention. So God has intervened. Keeping that in mind, analyze the picture here. It's Charles I. What is being placed on his head, and who seems to be placing it there? Pause the video here. Look at the picture closely. Think about that. So hopefully you've worked out that it's a crown being placed on his head. and there's a sort of a hand poking out of a cloud, placing that crown on his head. So it's clear that this is either a god or an angel. It's someone coming from the heavens. Okay. Now this is talking about an idea called the divine right of kings. So now that you know what divine means, and now you know that Charles is having a crown placed on his head, possibly by God or an angel, put that together. What might the divine right of kings mean? Once you think you've worked it out, complete the vocabulary box below. It should take you about 2 minutes. Okay, so just in case you're struggling with that, the divine right of kings is a belief that people house at this time, that kings are chosen by God. You can see that because he's having the crown placed on his head. Now, what that meant is that some kings or queens believed that their ideas could not be questioned. Because they'd been chosen by God, that meant that they were always right. That meant that nobody could go against them. Because if you go against the king or the queen, then you're going against God and you will end up in hell. So now that you know that, you should be able to use the phrase in a sentence and do the true or false questions underneath. If you haven't yet done that, pause the video here, spend the next couple of minutes doing that now. Okay, now the next tasks are some reading tasks. It's unfortunate that we're still in lockdown because I had organised a really fun activity for you where you were going to become a character and we were going to look at lots of reasons why people were angry and why that led to the Civil War. But sadly, of course, we can't do that. But as it says, you are going to read about anger, which was an underlying, that means a sort of long-term cause of the Civil War. Before you do that, you need to read this text here. You're then going to read each of the text kind of photocopies, and you're going to answer any questions underneath. These questions come from here, for example, 2 and 3. This is where you type your answers. This question 1 here comes from, that's an extra question, you've got it there, another question here, and so on. So read all of these extracts once you've read this text here, and then answer the questions underneath. Really simple, okay? Should take you at least 15, 20 minutes. Pause the video here and do those tasks now. Hopefully you've also noticed that there's a challenge question there asking you if there's any common reasons why people were angry. So by all means do that. But the next task, well, this is another one, I'm afraid, where I can't get it to work on Word Online. So you're going to need to print this off at home or maybe draw it out on a notepad and do it at home instead of on here. But what I'm asking you to do, thanks, is connect boxes by drawing arrows to show how the middle box was cause. So for example, let's see if I can put arrows and things on them here. I don't think I can. I'll do it in symbols. Don't think so. Yeah, it doesn't look like I can, unfortunately, which is annoying. But what I would do, for example, is I might sort of say, well, 1625, when Charles became king, England is nearly bankrupt. I might draw an arrow from that direct to this yellow box in the middle, because that's a direct cause of the Civil War. Yes, it happens well before the Civil War in 1625. The Civil War starts in 1642. But that's the fact that England is bankrupt causes Charles loads of problems, which means he has to keep on collecting taxes or go to Parliament to ask for more money. That leads to the Petition of Rights, to Charles's personal rule. Really, one of the main underlying reasons for the Civil War is that Charles never had any money. So I could draw an arrow directly to that, to the yellow box. I could also draw an arrow between this blue box to any event where Charles is asking for tax. For example, I could link it to the ship tax underneath by drawing an arrow between these two. I might be able to, can I see any others? Yeah, I could link it to this one at the bottom 1640, Charles I needed money to fight Scottish rebels, so he gave in to Parliament's demands for more powers. And then I could connect that one to the middle box, the yellow one. So I can either connect these directly, one to the middle, or I can connect a box to another box, and then connect them to the middle, kind of creating a chain reaction. I can also have more than one arrow coming off each box. Go nuts. Make basically as many connections between causes of the Civil War as you can. Pause the video here and do that now. Oh, there's a challenge question underneath too. Okay, and then the last task in this lesson, you are all going to write a claim paragraph. And you should be talking or explaining your answer to this question. What triggered the start of the Civil War in 1642? If you're not sure what that word triggered means, it's in the table above. It means an event which quickly causes or triggers another event to happen. Think of it like the trigger of a gun. Bang, the gun's gone. Bullets go thousands of miles an hour. This is an event which is happening fast and causing something else to happen immediately afterwards. Okay, it's a trigger. So what triggered the start of the Civil War in 1642? You're going to write two causes here which you think could be argued as having triggered the Civil War. So I'm going to be looking for events that are kind of close by. I'm going to go with these two. So one in 1641, Parliament making more demands and refusing to let Charles lead the army against the rebellion in Ireland. And 1640, Charles needing money to fight the Scottish rebels. So he's giving in to Parliament's demands. In fact, I'm not going to select that one. I think I'm also going to select Charles I and Archbishop Laud trying to introduce the English prayer book in Scotland, because that sparked the rebellion in Scotland, causes all the issues basically that Charles has there. So I'm going to write, I would write those two where it says type here. And then underneath, I'm going to write a claim paragraph answering the questions. Now, a reminder that a claim paragraph, you have a claim. So in this case, you might write one trigger for the Civil War in 1642 was, and then you're going to have your evidence. My evidence for this is, then you explain. This evidence shows that, then your therefore, or your summary. Therefore, one trigger for the Civil War in 1642 was. Okay, so there is a writing frame for you to use if you need it. If you don't need it, then don't use it. I would also suggest, as it says above, I believe, maybe it doesn't, but you should gonna do it anyway. I would also suggest that when you are writing, you try and include as many of the words from this yellow table above as you can. Like I said earlier on in the challenge question, the last lesson, if you practice using those words now, it's going to mean you'll smash your Aspiring for Excellence assessments. You get more marks if you use sophisticated level words like these. So start practicing using them now. So the last task then, answer the question, what triggered the start of the Civil War in 1642? Use all of these last few lessons to help you. Use the writing frame if you need it. Try and include, we'll say, at least 2 words from this table in your answer. That's it for this lesson, but stay on this video because I'm going to talk you through the quiz as well. Okay, I've come back out of the last lesson and I'm on your assignments page again. And you'll see that there's another assignment, quiz, week 4, year 7. Click on that. It's thinking about loading. We're going to go onto student view so you can see what it looks like for you. And then I'm just going to click on this quiz week for year 7. Now, there's a bit of a potential problem in that you have to do this on a computer, or a phone or a device. You cannot print this out and do it at home, but you can do it on a phone, so it shouldn't be a problem. It's really simple. All you do is read each of the questions. There are 13 in total, and you select your answer. I might select Edward VI, for example. Now, all of these answers are going to be sent to me in a table. So I will see, as I said at the start of the video, exactly what answer you gave. So I will know quite clearly if you've not done the lesson. You need to do the lesson, otherwise you can't do this. But you'll see it's pretty simple. Once you've answered all of the questions, you're just going to select submit at the bottom to send it to me. Now, a quick just bit of information. Questions 12 and 13, there is actually no wrong answer. All of these are correct. It's your opinion. So which of those 4 reasons do you think made people most angry? What do you think was the main cause of the English Civil War? You just select one, and they are actually all correct. Okay. So that's it for this week. I hope that was useful. I'll speak to you again next week for your next history lessons.